Hello YouTube audience, Editor Jace here. Before we join Ian in his Jurassic era, I wanted to let you know that today's audio might sound a little unusual. Unfortunately, Ian had the wrong audio input selected when he recorded this. I did the best I could, fixing the audio, but there is only so much even I can do. Thank you for your gracious understanding, and please make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as an offering to Algorithm Jesus.
Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. Today we're talking about everything about Itali after the bans. I was able to take this deck to a top 16 this last weekend over at Queen and Rook here in Philadelphia. 56-person, 5-round cut to top tournament. Wasn't able to make the finals unfortunately, but there was some crazy stuff that went into that game especially. But I think Itali is still alive and well. You just gotta play the deck a little bit differently post-bans. We're gonna talk about the things we liked in the deck, things we didn't like, what you have to cut sort of to make the deck work in the modern metagame, and we'll go from there. Without any further ado, if you like videos like this, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps out a ton here on YouTube. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, check out patreon.com/comedianmtg. By the time you're watching this video, I should be back from MagicCon, or probably haven't gotten back like last night. And it was an awesome time. I hope this isn't the past. I'm recording this. But I mentioned over on patreon.com/comedianmtg to the patrons that I'm hoping to do a little revamping of some of the tiers over there on Patreon. So if you're interested in that, check it out. And as I mentioned in last week's episode, I'm hoping to have a stretch goal of getting a brand new camera for the channel, which would be super awesome for both you and I. So yeah, sweet stuff. Without any further ado, let's jump into Itali here in this cEDH deck tech. For those who've never seen Itali in general, it's, as I mentioned, one of my favorite cEDH commanders because it is much like no other cEDH commander. Itali has trample, and when it enters the battlefield, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast a number of those spells from among them without paying their mana cost. You can do 9 Phyrexian to turn it over to a Blightsteel Colossus side. That part's super not important because we never use that part. And in fact, I encourage any people who are piloting this deck in a cEDH pod to not really ever think about using that side, because it turns out it shuts off your main game plan. So let's not do that. So what does Itali do as a deck? The whole point of this deck is to cast Itali, and cast Itali again, and make multiple copies of Itali as aggressively as possible. Your whole point of this is Gruul Turbo. Your commander has all the payoff in the command zone. It's not like Godo in the sense where it just wins, slam, 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 win the game. But it is very, very powerful and has the chance to convert. The thing with this deck that you have to be okay with as a pilot is it's random. You don't know what's on the top of everyone's library. You could have the best cards in the world on top of your library and you can win the game from one flip. You can also have the worst cards in the world. For example, in the last week's tournament, I at one point flipped 2 tutors and a protection spell in one of my flips, which was awesome. And then in that very same game, my first flip with Itali was 3 counter spells and an Orcish Lumberjack. So variance exists. It is a deck that plays into variance, but that's also what makes it fun. It is especially a fun deck in cEDH. And if you like sort of Manual Storm, if you like figuring out a puzzle as it's being revealed to you, this is a deck that does that. If you can sort of figure out the tools that are being presented to you and how to turn the corner with them, this is an awesome deck for you. It's not like other turbo decks because it's also much more creature focused, which is a really cool aspect of this deck, and especially for someone who likes to maybe go a little faster but doesn't like going all in on the ad nauseam, instant sorceries, necropotence type stuff. This is a really cool deck. So how do you actually win the game with this deck? There's 2 sort of main combos now that we no longer have Dockside in the format. The first one is using Food Chain. So with Food Chain, we are able to exile creatures and gain 1 more mana than their mana value. So obviously in this scenario, we need a creature to be able to cast from exile over and over again, which is where we get Squee the Immortal. Squee you can cast from your graveyard or from exile, meaning that as long as you exile Squee once, you're making 4 mana off Food Chain, able to recast it for 3, and you're able to generate infinite mana at that point. Now, I have been asked with this deck, how do you actually win when you have infinite Itali casts? And the answer is a little simple at some times and a little more complicated in others. You do have access to every single player in the pod's deck list, so it is pretty easy to be able to just say, I don't know, what are your win conditions, right? as sort of a tongue-in-cheek answer, but also to make it a little bit easier on yourself, the easiest way to sort of set up a loop is to get yourself an Eternal Witness, get yourself a Cloudstone Curio, which you can see here in the artifacts, and then bounce Eternal Witness and another creature over and over again after you have generated infinite creature mana, and then potentially switch over to something like a Lotus Petal to be able to pick up the Lotus Petal every time you recast Eternal Witness, gain a little bit of mana, etc., and mana that is not specifically for creatures like Food Chain is, and then change that into a Lightning Bolt and just bolt your opponents until they are no more. Now, speaking of the Cloudstone Curio that I just mentioned, that's the host of another one of our combos, which is using the Sticker Goblin. If you're not familiar with the sticker mechanics, the unfortunate reality is they are extremely complicated for what is supposed to be this light, silly mechanic. But the long and short of it is, as long as your creature with a sticker goes into a hidden zone, meaning your library, face down, exile, or your hand, you can remove the sticker that was placed on that card, right? So, for example, as long as you have the Sticker Goblin, when that enters the battlefield, you slap the appropriate sticker on it, and it makes red mana equal to the amount of vowels on that sticker. Now, I have attached below, in this deck list, the optimal stickers. The long and short of it is, the way the sticker configuration works, you have a 76% chance, I believe, if that's the number off the top of my head, of at least being able to get a sticker that gets you 5 vowels. I believe there are 3 5s, 1 6, a bunch of 4s, and only a single 3. So that's kind of the breakdown here with that. I also personally keep stickers on me that are proxies. You can absolutely do that even if you're going to an unproxied tournament. It does say in the official rules of stickers that you can use proxies of stickers, right? So I just have a sheet that has a black and white printout of the sticker page. It also has a big bold number that says how many vowels are in that word, for a little bit of ease of sanity. And then I'm able to use that over and over again while I'm going through that process. So it's pretty sweet, and it sort of saves up a little bit of time. But the long story short is that the Sticker Goblin makes you a bunch of mana when it enters the battlefield, right? So if you can set up a loop where it is basically bouncing itself with another red creature, right? Preferably one of your 1-drop red creatures like Orcish Lumberjack or Ragavan, and they're bouncing back and forth, and you're making more mana with its enter the battlefield than you are losing mana by recasting the goblin and the other creature, as long as you have Curio out bouncing them back and forth. What's nice about this current rendition is that I also have some cost reducers in here, right? So we have Goblin and Archomancer, which allows you to reduce the cost of those spells, as well as a Ruby Medallion here in the Artifact Suite, which they're both cards I would kind of be playing in this deck anyways, but I was not playing in previous renditions of the deck. These cost reducer effects actually do add up quite a lot, and I'm very happy with their inclusion when they previously were excluded from the list. One thing that you might notice in comparison to my old version of this deck is that I was not on Earthcraft. Earthcraft is a card that I had in the deck for quite some time, and after playing this deck again in the tournament this weekend, I do kind of want to go back to Earthcraft. Earthcraft basically allows you to take any of those creatures that you have on the battlefield, and as long as you have basic lands, it turns them into mana dorks, even if you do have summoning sickness with those creatures. It also opens up a number of different lines with the Cloudstone Curio loops, where it actually allows you to combo with different cards than were previously available. So Earthcraft is definitely going back into the deck, and I'll talk a little bit later about what we're trying to cut for that Earthcraft. The last of the combos in this deck is the fact that we do technically have Dualcaster Mage and a number of copy effects that can copy the Dualcaster Mage infinitely with Molten Duplication, Twin Flame, Electro Duplicate, and Heat Shimmer. These are all cards we are going to be playing in the deck anyways, because the whole point is to play Itali and then make copies of Itali and then do that again and then do that again and then do that again until we win. And sometimes this is also a Dualcaster combo. And I say that this is technically a combo in the deck because I've, in my many games of Itali, both pre and post ban, I have never actually won with the Dualcaster Mage combo. Not because it was unable to be found or anything, just because like by the time I have the pieces for that, other combos were available to me. Or it was post combat or something like that. So it's been fine though, because the Dualcaster Mage on its own is actually a piece I'm really excited about and super happy to use. And all of these copy effects are pieces I'm excited about and super happy to use. So there's no downside to having the combo in the deck. It's just, it doesn't come up that often.
at this quality. This is going to keep your cards safe. We're talking today about Heavy Play, longtime sponsor of the channel and amazing partner to work with here in Comedian MTG. Heavy Play makes amazing products. Their deck boxes, their dice trays, their play mats, their sleeves, everything is awesome. I love using the Heavy Play products. I have been using the specifically deck box and dice tray and playmat combo for months now, and honestly all of it still performs just as good as I need to. It keeps all of my cards safe. The dice tray is so convenient to just have slapped on the bottom of my deck box and can just pop it out, get some dice for the game, and there's no more fishing around in my bag going, oh, where's my dice, all that stuff. I love using Heavy Play products. They protect my cards just amazingly. And if you use code comedian, check that, you get 10% off your order. Woo-woo.
Now, I've mentioned that our plan is to play Itali and cast Itali and jam Itali over and over and over again. How are we protecting Itali, right? How do we make sure that this game plan goes through? You know, it's a deck that really hard folds to cards like Mind Trap and stuff like that. So how do we make sure that we can do this over and over and over again, right? Now, Mind Trap is one of the pieces that does get around most of the protection spells we have for this deck, but we do have things like Autumn's Veil, we have Pyroblast to counter blue spells, we have Red Blast to counter blue spells, we have Veil of Summer to give protection to all of our spells. All of these pieces come in really, really handy. We have Deflecting Swat, able to use Itali to counter some spells. We have Flare of Duplication to be able to copy spells that will be able to counter some spells, right? So there's a lot of protection on that aspect, and it's also one of the reasons I'm playing Wandering Archaic in the deck. You'll be able to stick an early Archaic, and it's a really good protection piece for the rest of your spells moving forward. Now, it is worthy to note that there have been people who've played things like Defense Grid and Dosin in the deck before, and I absolutely refuse to play those cards. For me personally, I find those cards very likely to kingmake, because the deck is really high variance, right? So you can't guarantee that when you go to put Itali on the stack, it's gonna always lead into a win. But with cards like Wandering Archaic and the Veils and stuff like that, they're much better at protecting your plan as it's being assembled, as opposed to just sort of hoping that if you stick a Dosin and then play Itali a couple times, it's not just going to throw the next person in turn order to win, right? Because if you whiff on that combo, which can happen a decent amount in this deck, it's really hard to be able to go like, okay, pass the turn to this person, and also they've got a defense grid of their own in play now, and no one's able to interact with them, right? So those things come at a bit too high of a risk-reward factor, so that's why I've removed it from my deck personally. Also, a new inclusion, Destiny Spinner in the deck. It's been okay. I played it in one game. I know it's an Itali thing that people have been trying for a really long time, and I played it like once or twice over the course of this tournament, and it looked promising, but it just sort of never came up in a lot of the games. I did have multiple times where, when I was able to get it out, my opponents were kind of scrambling because they were like, oh no, we can't counter his creatures for the rest of the game. So that was pretty relevant, but I still want to test it more to sort of determine exactly how I feel about it. Sanctum Weaver is also a new addition. If you might notice, there's a decent amount of enchantments in this deck, and I'm thinking about adding Earthcraft, which would be even more enchantments in the deck. So Sanctum Weaver just seemed like a pretty good mana dork that, first of all, doesn't have 1 toughness, so it doesn't die to the first Bowmaster's Ping, requires at least 2. And it also has a high ceiling to it, right? Worst case scenario, this is a dork that just adds 1 mana of any color, right? Which is still okay. And then, with other cards in the deck, its potential just grows and grows and grows and grows over time. In old versions of this deck, I wasn't playing Burgi. That was a mistake. Burgi is absolutely busted. If you're able to play a Burgi and then resolve Itali, the fact that if you get to cast all 4 spells, which does happen a decent amount, you're making 4 red mana off of all of those is pretty insane. So Burgi is absolutely a banger. Super happy to play it in the deck. Also, a new one that many people may not be familiar with is Metamorphosis. The long and short of it is, as additional cost, you sack a creature and then add X mana, where X is 1 plus the sacrifice creature's mana, and then use it to only cast creature spells. So, to be honest, a lot of the times you're playing your first Itali, it comes down for 7 mana, you use 1 mana to go, alright, cool, Metamorphosis my Itali, and make 8 mana just for creatures. You spend 1 more mana, that's your 9 to pay for commander attacks, boom, Itali round 2. It's not the prettiest card in the world, but it gets stuff done, right? At the end of the day, it does the job it needs to. One thing you're going to notice about this deck in comparison to how it was before the bans is it's still able to go pretty fast. It's much more of a turn 3 deck now, right? You're able to turn 3 really push for a decent amount of Itali And that's not bad by any means. It's just a little bit different than how it used to play, right? Like, you can still threaten the turn 2s, etc., but I really didn't do that a whole ton in this deck. It was a lot more about finding the right window for me to start casting Itali or Italis, and going from there, right? As opposed to just going, all right, we can send it on turn 1 pretty easily, where we were in the last format with Jeweled Lotus and Dockside and Mana Crypt, right? I will say too, like, I'm super pleased with the record of this deck. Drew round 1, was able to win the next 2 games in a row. Drew round 4. All of my draws during the course of the tournament were just natural draws. I guess I should say the round 4 draw was a board state where there was basically a king-making position, and I was forced to sort of accept a draw in that spot. And then first loss of the day was in round 5, and then unfortunately lost the semifinals as well. But, starting the day off without any losses, going 2 wins, 0 losses, 2 draws to start things off, and only taking my first loss in the last round of Swiss, made me feel pretty confident that Itali has what it takes to go. And honestly, there was a couple times in some of those draws where I said, I really was flipping a coin basically to determine if I won, but the odds still weren't bad. Like 50-50 to win a game is really not bad. And had I been playing a little more aggressively, there's probably a chance in which I could have taken some harder risks during the course of the tournament and potentially even push that record up a little bit more aggressively. So, definitely is a pivot with the deck sometimes when you're willing to really just fully send it. I know that's kind of what lost me in the semifinals. Long story short, I kept a hand that was able to get me a potentially turn 1 Treasonous Ogre into a turn 1 Itali if I specifically won a gamble. And I know this came up in our semifinals. I kept a hand that was basically, if I draw a land on turn 1, there was a very high likelihood that I could use a gamble to assemble a hand that made it so I had a turn 1 Treasonous Ogre into a turn 1 Itali, which I thought was super duper worth it on the play in the semifinals. Unfortunately, I did not hit a land drop till turn 5, and the gamble pitched one of the pieces I needed to even be able to get my game plan back online. By the time I had things ready to go, and this is where that conversation comes in about like playing more proactively versus playing more safe, I ended up choosing to play a Destiny Spinner so that when I played Treasonous Ogre the next turn, it was uncounterable, which felt like a very safe option at the time. But I forgot there was a Derevi in my pod, and Derevi came in, and with its enter the battlefield opponent, my opponent very astutely tapped down my Mana Vault. And so I wasn't actually able to get that Treasonous Ogre online for 4 or 5 more turns, it was a very slow semifinals game. Maybe 4 or 5 is exaggerated, but it was at least 2 or 3 more turns until I got that Treasonous Ogre online to get Itali down, right? So Destiny Spinner was awesome at protecting my creatures, but then I never actually got to cast those creatures, right? So going for that more safe line ended up actually costing me, right? And I think that's one of the tough parts about a deck like this, where it's not full turbo, but there are times when, I kept a hand basically with the potential of Itali turn 1, and that can escalate to wins turn 1. But it going wrong meant it went really wrong, and I didn't do things for 6 turns, right? So a little bit of the high variance that can come when you play a deck like this that is truly giving into the most base instincts of mono red and cEDH, even though it's a Gruul deck. It's a very red focused deck. Since the ban, I have gone up a land in this deck. Figured, hey, we lost Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus, probably should be on at least 1 more land. Made sense to me at the time. I've also just added a few more ramp pieces. We're on a few of these enchantment ramp pieces that we weren't on previously, like Utopia's Brawl. We were on Wild Growth already, and Carpet of Flowers is also pretty new. Carpet of Flowers, I'm a little bit suspect of in this deck because this is a deck that is, even if it's not trying to win early, it's trying to produce a decent amount of mana early. And multiple times during the course of this tournament, by the time I got Carpet of Flowers onto the battlefield, it just wasn't producing the mana I needed it to for, once again, a deck that is much more proactively inclined, right? So Carpet of Flowers is one of those cards that escalates really well into the mid to late game, but it just was really not performing for me this last weekend. I'm still willing to test it for now, but I will say very vehemently that it was a disappointment as far as my play is concerned with it. Minsc Boost continues to be a really good player in the deck. It's able to come in, be a sacrifice outlet for Itali if you need it to be, and if not, it's just, hey, let's make a hamster, buff up the hamster, sacrifice it 1 time, remove 1 creature, draw 4 cards. And in that situation, I actually was able to play a game in which it was able to take out an opponent's threat. It actually triggered an Orcish Bowmasters, in which I was actually okay with the Orcish Bowmasters getting triggered because it wiped out some threatening cards on the table, and I was able to draw 4 cards and then still have a good setup for going into my next turn. So Minsc Boost, super good at just even if you only get 1 time of it, making the hamster, hitting somebody for 4, sacrificing, draw 4 cards, do 4 damage to a card. All of that's super awesome, and super happy to play it for that reason alone.
The whole reason I was able to get out to SCG Portland was thanks to Tales of Adventure Magic. Now, they have a feature that they wanted me to let you all know about, which we're going to talk about here today. Now, when you're selling cards to a vendor like Tales of Adventure Magic, it's very easy to just walk up with a pile of cards and just hand them over to the vendor, still sleeve, things like that. But instead, what if you just be able to hand them your phone and have them give you a price right away and trade in your cards? I was able to save up enough cardboard just from things I've opened throughout the years, and I actually was able to use this feature to trade in cards to get myself a Candelabra of Tanos, which is a reserve list piece that I've wanted to play in cEDH for quite some time, but honestly could never get my hands on, and it was super sweet. It's a card I've wanted forever, and it was an awesome trade-in. I just went over to tcgplayer.com, I logged into my account and used the collection tracker. So the collection tracker keeps a value of your cards so that when you hand your cards over to a vendor, if you hand them in a pile and say, hey, this is the cards I'm handing you right now, boom, they can look at the total, they can give you how much they're going to give you in either credit or cash, and if you have any trade-ins, they can handle that right away. I mean, the whole transaction took realistically like less than a minute. I just walked in, showed them my collection tracker, and I walked away with a candelabra and some cash in my hands. It was absolutely awesome, and I highly encourage, if you're looking to sell to a vendor at location, this is absolutely the way to do it. So check out talesofadventure.com, toamagic.com.
You may notice that I did cut Wheel of Fortune from the last time I played this deck. It's not that I explicitly think Wheel of Fortune is bad in this deck, but more so I was finding that I had a lot of situations where I was keeping like turn 1, dump a bunch of mana into a Wheel of Fortune hands, and almost every single time I kept those hands, they got blown out. I think if I go into another run with this deck at a tournament soon, I'm probably going to put Wheel of Fortune back in just to kind of suss out if it's worth it to still be running it, even if it blows me out. And also into the new meta where there's many times where your opponents are turtling up with Ristics, Mystics, etc. Like sometimes it's good to just jam a wheel into those scenarios so that they start using their interaction and they're not just turtling up for the whole time, right? So one thing I will say, despite it putting in work in one of my matches, I'm really low on the Blood Moon effects right now. I thought, given the new metagame with the Dockside ban, that these cards would be doing better, to be honest. But right now, because of how good other green decks are, like Kinnan and Thrasios and stuff like that, I'm just really finding that the Blood Moon effects are feeling super underwhelming, which is really disappointing because I'm really enjoying those effects. Strangely enough, when I was playing Karlach, I found that the Back to Basics and Winter Moon effects, those were a completely different conversation, right? But Blood Moon in particular just was not doing what I wanted it to. I even had a Sisay deck in the pod where like they had a Gaia's Cradle and stuff like that, and it was good at doing that. But what I was finding more often was I would have these hands where I would basically have to decide, you know, am I going to take an entire turn off to develop this Blood Moon or Magus the Moon effect, or am I going to commit to the Itali plan, right? So it's not necessarily that any of these effects are bad, and in fact, in the mid to late game, they're often pretty defining as to like what you can do with the deck. I was just finding that there were several scenarios where I would look at the Blood Moon in hand and go, I think if I play this now, I just king make this one player, and then everyone else gets really punished by it, right? There were times where, don't get me wrong, it kept me alive in games that were pretty tough. There was a game where, as I mentioned in my second to last round of Swiss, where there was a Derevi player who had a ton of advantage, and Blood Moon really shut them out, as well as a Sisay with the Cradle. And that was awesome, but it still was in that game where like there was a Malcolm deck in there who was hitting and making treasures. And it, you know, the Sisay deck also still had a bunch of mana dorks, so they were able to continue accruing value even though Blood Moon was stopping them from like explicitly winning. So that, with given the fact that I have to take an entire turn off to completely sidestep my main game plan with the deck, made me really concerned that the Blood Moon effects are not looking super great right now, which is tough because it's literally one of my favorite cards of all time. So it's really tough to see that those effects are not feeling fantastic right now. I may try in that next run that I was talking about, I'm probably going to try and cut the Magus of the Moon and the Blood Moon and replace them with Earthcraft and Wheel of Fortune and see if it feels better to have just more of that just send it mentality, as opposed to the, hey, let's have these pieces for a little bit of the grindier game, because it just doesn't feel like what Itali is trying to do. For those who haven't seen a breakdown of this deck before, gotta shout out some of the big players in the deck. Rionia is one of those creatures that if you resolve that alongside Itali, you have like a 90% chance of winning the game. Just because if you get a couple Itali casts, for example, a lot of the times you can like cast Itali, maybe you flip into a tutor, that gets you your Rionia, suddenly you've cast 1 or 2 instances of sorceries over the course of the game. You're playing Rionia, getting 3 more Italis as you head into combat, all that kind of stuff. Really snowballs to actually winning the game. So Rionia, super solid at being able to push the advantage when it's there. Got to shout out Hellkite Courser. It has an ETB. You just take your commander, you put it on the field. It's really as simple and clean as that. You just take that commander and you put it onto the battlefield. It's awesome at being able to do that. It's like this effect is actually so good that I've actually been considering Composite Golem, which is a creature that says when it hits, you can cast your commander for free, because Hellkite Courser basically does a very similar thing. So really been enjoying Hellkite Courser throughout the deck, and also it's one of those things where if you flip over an Eldritch Evolution, which happens a pretty decent amount with a deck like this, either your own Eldritch Evolution or, Eldritch Evolution is a very popular card in the format, right? But if you play Itali and hit an Eldritch Evolution, you can often sacrifice your Itali to put it back in the command zone. Have Hellkite Courser come in from your deck, which will then enter the battlefield, and have Itali come back in from the command zone to get another Itali into the battlefield trigger, which is always one of my favorite synergies in the deck, and it's super fun to happen. Big shout out to Treasonous Ogre. It's one of the things keeping this deck alive in the current format. I've never loved the Treasonous Ogre hands with this deck, if I'm being truly honest. Like, the Treasonous Ogre hands always stress me out, because you're like, cool, I go to 8 life to try and cast Itali once, I guess. And no, I'm aware the math is not exactly 8 life. You only pay 21 life the first cast of Itali, but realistically, you're paying life to other things, all that kind of stuff, right? The nice part about this deck is, like, you don't have a Godo, right? Like, it's not just, if I resolve Treasonous Ogre, the game is over type of effect, right? It's like, if I resolve Treasonous Ogre, your opponents are like, well, crap, that's a quick Itali, but we're not dead, right? So there's that little bit of ambiguity there, which is like 100% valuable and viable. And also one of the reasons that keeps this deck viable, right? Because if Itali was like deterministically gonna rip a win, I think it would be very easy to just go, cool, you just never let the 7 mana thing happen, period, end of day, right? But because there's that like ambiguity to it of like, what could you flip? There are times where you do find yourself in a position where you can potentially push in a place in which your opponents are more inclined to sort of just let you do it. And then there are certain windows where, they didn't really have the interaction to hit on certain axes, and it's already past that point. Now, it doesn't happen quite often. A lot of the times what just happens is you have something like a Veil of Summer or an Autumn's Veil, or you have a Wanderer Kick on the field, and you can push in a place in which your opponents just don't have enough answers to Itali himself, and therefore they get exhausted by the time that they go into this round, or by the time it goes into like a winning proposition with the deck. Also, fun fact, if you like Itali and you are Dino pilled like me, you can check out our Bonfire store, where Sam of the Howling Salt Mine actually made us an Itali Dino pilled shirt, and it was something I was shilling super hard before the ban, because I absolutely love this, and 90% of the reason I had this commissioned was because I love this deck so much. But then the ban happened, and I wasn't sure if the deck was going to be okay. And luckily, I played it, rocked out with my shirt, and you can see the picture somewhere right about here of me just absolutely rocking the Dino vibe. It's one of my favorite parts of playing this deck, is just getting into the Dino vibes and just playing with the Itali energy of, hey guys, I'm just happy to be here. I'm going to try and cast this dinosaur. Is that cool? It's one of my favorite things to do, absolutely, in cEDH period. And yeah, this deck is so much fun. But if you want to pick those up, check out the Bonfire store. All right, last thing to do when sort of looking at this deck in the new format is go, hey, how do these opening hands even look? So looking at a hand like this one, we got a 1-lander. We cannot afford to keep a hand like this, so we're going to refresh it. Now, with these mulligans, I'd like to go seat by seat, and as soon as I keep a hand, I'll move to the seat afterwards. All right, so this would be a first seat to start things off. All right, going into our second mulligan here, we have a Gemstone Caverns able to come down right away. Now, oh, sorry, just kidding. We just said we're in first seat. So definitely not Gemstone Caverns coming down right away. However, this hand is still an immediate snap keep for me personally, because this is turn 1, play a Misty Rainforest into a Taiga, where you play your Orcish Lumberjack, and maybe even play the LED. You might want to sandbag the LED just so your opponents don't know you're going for the turn 2 Itali, which can definitely be scary for some people. That's a new word that I made up, apparently. What's crazy is that if we're in second seat with this hand, we actually don't even need to crack the Lion's Eye Diamond because we have 4 mana plus 1 more plus the City of Traders, right? Which is pretty cool, and that way you can hold up the Flare of Duplication. But being in first seat, this is still pretty sweet. Cool. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, without even really having to look at any more cards here, this is a turn 2 Etali no matter what, and if we are not on the play, this is a turn 2 Etali with Flare of Duplication as backup to be able to sack the Lumberjack, or Etali hurts. I'm saying calling her. It's not a her. Itali himself to be able to flare to protect your potential wins or to copy a spell that's going to give you a lot of advantage. And the answer is yes. I'm 100% willing to just crack an Lion's Eye Diamond to make it happen. But also do your best to read the table, right? If your opponents are like, oh my god, Itali's scary, I'm mulliganing to Mind Break Trap, then maybe don't discard your hand to cast Itali in that situation. But that's up to you as a pilot to be able to read that situation. The nice part is, as I mentioned, one more land drop means that you can go for the win with the Flare of Duplication as protection. And by the win, I mean just casting Itali. So that's pretty sweet to be able to do as well. So yeah, big love for that hand. Let's go to another one. All right, so we're imagining we're in second seat here. Yeah, we can get a turn 1 Orcish Lumberjack down with a Taiga, which means next turn that's 4 mana, and then even 5 with the Rite of Flame, but the Mox Diamond, no other land's pretty tough. The Destiny Spinner and Veil of Summer are awesome for protecting our wins, but we definitely don't have the excess mana to be able to do that. And then Archdruid's Charm is a really cool mid to late game piece, but that's not where we're at. So definitely ship that away for the mulligan process. Second 7 has us. Man, I wish I was seeing these games during the tournament the other day. Oh my god, these hands have been crazy. Yeah, this is it's a turn 1 Burgie. And actually, if you exile the Jaxus, which is always tough, or the Wonder Archaic, I think it's actually maybe the Archaic here, if you want to play the more guaranteed plan. Archaic's a safer plan, but Jaxus is the plan that more likely has a double up. You can go Burgie into Birds of Paradise turn 1, and then you're able to have 4 mana, 5 mana, plus whatever spells you can probably cast into Burgie to try and get you up to 7 for turn 2 is pretty sweet. Plus, if you make enough red mana and you kept Jaxus in your hand, you can then blitz Jaxus out and potentially trying to copy Itali as early as turn 2. So not only 1 Itali flip, but turn 2, 2 Itali flips. Or you can even just keep the more safe Wonder Archaic hand and go for a protected turn 3 Itali, which is really in the sweet spot of where you want to be. As I said, this is the hand I absolutely love for this deck. You have options, which is not always easy in Gruul, having multiple things you can do, so we'll take that any day of the week. All right, we're in seat 3. No lander means no hand. All right, in this situation, we have Breach, which, for those who haven't seen me deck tech Itali before, Breach in this deck is not like a hard combo Breach. It is just, we are a, air quotes, storm deck, right? So we're casting a lot of spells. However, here, it's not really getting us much of anything, so we're going to ship that away. Not much here either, so we're probably going to have to go down to 5. We just can't keep 1-landers in a lot of these situations. These are starting to look more like the hands I was dealt with the other day. And it's tough, right? Like, this is a deck where sometimes you can keep snap explosive 7s, and then mulliganing is really, really hard. And I think that's the thing that I noticed a lot about this deck after the ban, is the games where you have to mulligan really hard, you really have to mulligan hard, right? Like, my round 1, I mulliganed down to 4, played a Tinderwall and a land on turn 1, and for the next 3 turns, played a land drop and passed, right? So it's definitely not a deck in which the mulligans are very forgiving, but you still have to mulligan aggressively because that's just how the deck works. You got to get your game plan online, right? So it's part of playing this deck is like those risks of playing it. But I have said, like, a lot of the work that I put into the deck as of late has been trying to get these mulligans as consistent as possible. And even then, it still struggles at times. So let's go to 4. Okay. Third seat going to 4. It's one of the times where the Carpet of Flowers does actually look pretty okay because we can get it down pretty early. So for here, I probably keep the land, a way to get my Talisman down on turn 1, right, which is Simian or Elvish. Doesn't really matter which one is which. Actually, probably keep Elvish here because Simian's much better later in the game, and then keep the Carpet, right? So not excited about the Carpet in the early game because you're already really low on resources, and you basically tell your opponents, hey, if you don't play Islands, I'm choked out of the game forever. But for a 4, I'm not really going to get too greedy. I'm not going to go look for, like, land, mana vault, treasonous ogre, right? The odds of that happening are still pretty low, right? Or like 2 lands in a Sylvan Library, right? So for me, it's more realistic that, hey, let's keep this 4 that at least makes a decent amount of mana, you have 3 mana, hypothetically, if you see an island going into the second turn. And you just got to hope that your opponents are on blue. Now, if they're not on a blue heavy plan, you're probably just keeping either a Spirit Guide or the Desperate Ritual. Spirit Guide's safer, probably. But if that's the case and you don't expect many islands, it might be worth considering going to 3 in that situation. And yeah, it's a tough part of the deck, right? When mulligans are not easy in a deck that does not have blue, there's no Mystic Remora to bail you out. You really just have like Sylvan Library and the Treasonous Ogre plan are the only things that really bail you out of this situation, which is really hard to turbo mulligan for. Okay, so imagining this is 4th seat and this is our first 7, we are looking at a hand that is... This is a good hand for Itali in the modern metagame, right? This is what I like to call the solid turn 3, right? We have the ability to, despite in a lot of decks that I like, I don't love necessarily not doing anything turn 1. In this deck, you get to go Taiga turn 1, or potentially Arid Mesa. If you do play the Surveil land in the deck, which I don't personally, I'm not a huge fan of it. It did come up a couple times that I could have definitely played a Surveil land in here, but you get to go Taiga turn 1, into turn 2, go for the Burgi, right? And this also probably depends on what number you have for your Sticker Goblin. If you have 5 or 6, this hand's pretty keepable. If you have 4 on your Sticker Goblin, unfortunately, it's probably not worth keeping because it's just a Rite of Flame in that situation. But I'm basically keeping this hand off the fact that Burgi is just such a good card for the deck that we sort of can keep hands that are somewhat lacking in the aspect of, hey, at least Burgi is going to be here to fix our stuff, right? So at the very least, we have Burgi here. Hopefully he'll do a little bit of savioring for us. But hypothetically, if we do have a low Sticker Goblin, let's move to a second 7 in that situation. Ooh. This is a turn 2 Treasonous Ogre, which is pretty good. But if we're worried about Treasonous Ogre getting countered, this could be a turn 3 Treasonous Ogre with Red Elemental Bless to back it up, which is also very good. So this is exactly the kind of hand we really like in this deck because we have options. Options are really, really good in this deck, right? The ability to read that your opponent has a Mindbreak Trap or a Force of Will or something like that and then just blast it is really, really nice, right? So, at the end of the day, people are going to be okay with a little bit of Italianing, but as soon as you pass that like too much Itali threshold, you're going to love having Pyroblast and Red Blast and all those responses. So I know some people really like Guttural Response in these colors, and I'm not super in love with Guttural Response because it only counters a blue spell as opposed to Red Blast and Pyroblast, which blow up Rhystic Studies, which is pretty sweet. I actually had that situation come up, and I love to bring up the scenario. And one of the reasons I'm considering a card called Back to Nature is that this deck feeds a Rhystic Study and a Mystic Remora like it's nobody's business. And when you're doing that, obviously you really give your opponents a lot of interactions, but you're doing so in the way where you're going, I think I can still probably win even if I do give people a bunch of cards, right? But Red Blast and Pyroblast, really good at being able to blow up those Rhystics. Force of Vigor does the same thing. Archer's Charm does the same thing. Besage does the same thing, right? So you do have a lot of main deck answers baked into this thing that is very predominantly a problem. One of the cards I was considering and ended up cutting for, I believe, the Blood Moon, ironically speaking, was this card Back to Nature, which I think is a card I'm definitely going to test in the list. I just don't know when. But it's an instant that destroys all enchantments, which I think is really, really sweet. Now, I think the thing that tipped me over the edge in this version was I was trying out the Sanctum Weaver tech in the deck right now. So that's what kind of kept me off of fully committing to the Back to Nature thing. But if I'm worried about Rhystics and Mystics moving forward, which it seems very rational to do at this current point in the cEDH meta, I think it's totally reasonable to be able to look at a card like Back to Nature to go, all right, cool, end step before my turn, right before I think I'm about to go crazy with some sort of Mystic, Rhystic, etc. Let me just, boom, destroy all enchantments, go in for the kill, right? Get rid of those Smothering Ties, those Mystics, those Rhystics, those copy enchantments that are copying other people's Smothering Ties, those steal enchantments that are taking your Rhystic Study, all of that stuff, throw in the garbage, get it out of here, right? So that's, once again, in a more friendly to not playing enchantments type of build. As I said, I'm testing out the Sanctum Weaver stuff. I'm testing out Utopia Sprawl, things like that, like Earthcraft. So therefore, Back to Nature was a little bit like, yeah, I like enchantments too, though. But it's definitely something I'm experimenting with. And, going into those Rhystic Mystic turns, boom, just blast it out. Try and, get rid of all those things that are going to make it punishing for you to be able to go for the win. And that's Modern Itali, one of my favorite decks in cEDH. Itali the Primal Conqueror is a list I am absolutely in love with playing. It's some of the most fun I have playing cEDH, hands down, and I'm super grateful that I can keep showing up with it for tournaments and that it did still survive the bans. It's definitely not as lethal as it was in the previous format, right? It's definitely a deck where you have to play a little bit more into the, like, wait for your window and then jam type of thing, as opposed to just having the opportunity to just go like turn one Itali, go 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 go. It's not an easy deck either. It's sort of easy like Kinnan in the sense of like I can understand the concept of it pretty easy. You cast Itali, you try and do that a bunch of times, right? But it becomes difficult in the sense that like eventually you have to start storming off with your opponent's cards, which is not easy. You don't plan around with your opponent's cards, and it's actually one of the hardest decks of all time to goldfish because you go, all right, this hand gets an Itali turn 2, and then I figure it out from there because I don't know what my opponent's decks to have to flip over, right? And you're not just going to play a random generator that flips over a random card in a random blue farm or rocks, whatever it might be, right? So, long story short, Itali is a deck that I really, really enjoy, but it is a deck that comes with a difficulty ceiling for sure. It's so much fun, though. Being Dino pilled, the way to go. It's definitely a deck where if you are so tired of like doing the grindy thing, the Ristic thing, the Mystic thing, it's just such a vibe. Like legitimately, it's a deck that is 100% vibe. You go and you sort of you don't shut your brain off because like obviously it does take a little bit of skill to be able to play the deck, but you go and you sort of just go like, hey, I'm playing the dinosaur. Let's see what happens, kind of thing. And I'm going to embrace the chaos and fully commit to it. So there's so much still to be explored with Itali. I really, 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 really love this deck, and super grateful to be able to play one of my favorite decks of all time. And let me know what you all think. What do you think of Itali? What do you think of Itali post-ban? Do you think that it's a miracle that I was able to do as well as I could, or do you think the deck is still alive and well? I know Hamsteak made top 16 post-ban with it as well, if not 2, maybe. So there's definitely pilots out there still doing well. Shout out to the Itali Discord. It's perhaps one of the friendliest Discords I've ever been a part of, and they always get so excited when I show up and play the deck. So major shout out to all of them. V-Turbo Guy is one of the people running it, and also just a super nice, sweet Itali advocate. So huge shout out to everyone in the Itali space. Rock on, best dinosaur in the world. If you're interested in playing Itali or any of the decks that I feature at these tournaments, or you just want to take the next step up in your cEDH gaming, make sure to hit me up at comedianmtg@gmail.com or in any of the places in the link tree down below, as I do cEDH coaching as my full-time gig. I have a number of pilots and coaching recipients that have gone on to do really awesome stuff over the past few years. And there's many people who I've worked with in a short or long-term capacity who've had a lot of success in this format. So if you're interested in taking that next step up, feel free to hit me up at any of those places, and I'm super happy to schedule something with you. I have a full breakdown for all that kind of stuff, so just ask and I'll send you all the details. Without any further ado, thank you so much for watching this video. Really appreciate each and every one of you, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.